Barbaresco hangover is kind of easier for you than a Barolo hangover. You can try, and you tell me. I proved that. I have experience in that aspect. The request for fine wines started to develop more and more dramatically, and that's what Barolo and Barbaresco were, because the aging potential, the complexity for these wines, put them in the same league with Bordeaux and Burgundy. As a cooperative, we share profits. Mm-hmm. The farmers own the company. In fact, I have 54 bosses. So it's kind of an interesting situation to be. They are nice, but still. So the joke is that my family doesn't own the company, but probably the company owns the family. Some discussions, a little bit of fighting, a lot of wine drunk, some salami and pan, things like that, some cheese. After 5 years of this, the village of Barbaresco defined the single vineyard, the MGAs.
Hi everybody, this is Agnes from No Sediment and welcome to No Sediment Wine Podcast. Today my guest is Aldo Vacca. You are Managing Director of Produttori del Barbaresco.
Yes.
Hi, how are you?
Very fine, how are you? Hello everybody.
Great to be here. I will maybe explain a little bit why we are here, because last year when I was visiting, you took us around the Barbaresco area and you talked so deeply and so passionately about the history, about the grapes, about the vineyards. And I thought, oh my God, I have to record this. I have to record it for the viewers and see. So now a year later, we are here. And thank you for for sparing your time. I know you're very busy during this time. But maybe before we start, you can tell us a little bit about yourself. I know you're deeply rooted within this region.
Yeah, like most people in the region, we have very deep roots in the area and in the job that we do. So the Produttori del Barbaresco winery was actually founded in this form in 1958 by 19 farmers who grouped together and started to make wine together instead of selling grapes, therefore trying to make a little extra profit. And among those 19 families that founded Produttori del Barbaresco, both my grandfathers were among the original founders. So my family is deeply involved with the Produttori del Barbaresco on both sides. My father was actually the managing director. It was called the segretario, the secretary of the company from 58 to 84. So my father managed Produttori del Barbaresco from the beginning to 1984 for over 3 decades. The reason he was chosen among the 19 families because he was the only person among the 19 family with a university degree. So basically he was the only one that knew how to make a phone call, how to write an order. So basically the beginnings were very, very basic, but he was the man that was in charge by the other families to run the company. When he retired in 1984, I was still at university studying agriculture. Then I traveled a little bit, of course. And I started, my first job was actually the Gaia winery down the street. I worked there for 4 years. In 1990, the business of Produttori started to develop more toward the export market. They needed somebody to work with the export market. And so they asked me to join or kind of come back to my roots. So I started working at Produttori del Barbaresco in 1991, and I'm still here. So the joke is that my family doesn't own the company, but probably the company owns the family.
That is a good joke. Yes, that's true. But so Produttori del Barbaresco, I don't know, are you proud of that or not? Because some wineries don't want to mention that, but you are cooperative.
Yes, we are very proud because we are considered, as Robert Parker said many years ago, an example for wine cooperatives around the world. And one of the few wine cooperatives that is known for fine wine production and not just for everyday production. Because most of the wine cooperatives is very typical of Europe. Basically because the land ownership in wine regions of Europe, from France to Spain, Italy, Austria, Germany, usually is very small. So a lot of small farmers owning little pieces of land, back in the days until the 50s, the 60s, too small to have their own winery. So the idea, they were basically selling grapes, making little money. In fact, especially in Italy, the wine industry until the 60s was divided in two. On one side were the owners of the land, which for the vast majority were farmers, selling grapes, and on the other side were the wineries, which for the vast majority were negociant buying grapes. Things started to change in the 60s and really changed later on, and in the last 2 decades, 90% of the Barbaresco is estate bottled, so made by wineries that own land, and the same thing, maybe 80% in Barolo. But in those days it was very different. So these farmers were selling grapes, having difficulties to survive. The idea of grouping together, make wine together seems kind of reasonable. The governments of Europe, France, Spain, Italy, were giving funds to the small farmers in order to group together. So that helps also a lot of cooperatives to be created. Any wine appellation of Europe you visit, at least as one local wine cooperative. But normally this local wine cooperative is known for everyday, simple, not so interesting wine. This is an exception, thanks to the decision they took from the beginning, the golden decision, the golden rule that we have, which is solo Nebbiolo, only Nebbiolo, or better than that, only Barbaresco. We crush and vinify only Nebbiolo grapes from the Barbaresco appellation. It's something that is very rare. Even these days, we are, I think, the only mono-varietal winery in the region of Langhe, or Piedmont, because traditionally in the region of Barolo and Barbaresco, we grow many grapes and we don't blend them. So any winery you visit in the area makes a Barolo, but also a Dolcetto, a Barbera, maybe a Chardonnay, maybe a Moscato. We don't do that. We only deal with the Nebbiolo grape from Barbaresco since day one. So we are very specialized, and that, of course, made the market difficult at the beginning. If you have only one product, and that product is not an easy wine to sell. If you go back to the 50s, to the 60s, Barbaresco was a wine that was mainly consumed on special events. The everyday drink of this region and of northern Italy were other wines, like Dolcetto was drunk every day here. Barbera was also easy wine to sell because people drank Barbera on a regular basis in Torino, in Milano, in Genova. Barbaresco was used only for special events, which in those days were like a wedding, or maybe a Sunday lunch for a wealthy family, or an anniversary. And in those special occasions, Barbaresco was a second choice to Barolo. So decided to confine your production to a special event second choice wine was a little bit of a marketing suicide. But it kind of forced the farmers, the winery, to think quality rather than quantity. So in the years when money was to be made in producing a lot of cheap wine, we didn't go that way. Since day one, we started to reward quality and started to produce a good quality wine for a good value. And so that reputation stuck with us and made Produttori an example for wine cooperatives around the world.
I literally have here the question, how do you maintain the quality?
Yeah.
So is there maybe some higher price to be paid for higher quality grapes, organically grown? I don't know, how do you?
Yeah, again, that's something that in these last 2 decades is kind of a common sense thing. We reward quality. So when our farmers, which are now 54, deliver their Nebbiolo grapes to the winery, each individual load of grapes is weighed and quality checked. These days we measure quality by taking a sample of the juice, just crushed, and measuring sugar, color, and tannins. It's something that we can do in 40 seconds. So by measuring the sugar level, the color intensity, and the phenolic ripeness, so the ripeness of the tannins of that specific load of grapes, we have a pretty good indication of the quality of that specific load that is used to decide what to do with those grapes. If they come from a single vineyard and the quality is very high, they go in the single vineyard batch for fermentation. If they come from a single vineyard but they miss some quality, they may be downgraded to Barbaresco or even to Langhe Nebbiolo if it's a young vineyard juice. So the farmer is not really interested in that. The farmer that has been doing the delivery is interested in the quality factor, because based on that quality factor, we build a scoreboard, and every load of grapes will be paid more or less according to the quality. So one load can be paid 3 euros per kilo of grapes, the other one 4, the other one 5. Last year we paid 3.2 euros up to 6.2. 30 steps of 10 cents. So every little extra sugar, every little extra color is rewarded with more money per kilo. Again, this is kind of a simple thing to do these days. The fact that we have been doing this quality payment since 1958 set the Produttori aside. The farmers that are part of Produttori know that because we don't really pay grapes. As a cooperative, we share profits. The farmers own the company. In fact, I have 54 bosses. So it's kind of an interesting situation to be. They are nice, but still. So the farmers know that the most successful is the business, the more money is in the bank, the bigger will be the profit to be shared among them. But they also know that the better quality grapes they delivered in that vintage, the bigger will be their piece of the cake among the total profit. So they are very focused on quality production. We have 3 farmers out of 54 which are organically certified. One is actually biodynamic, the other 2 are just organic. But we are not rewarding that yet. It's something that we may do in the future. It's a little more sensitive because only 3 out of 54 they have that certification. So we'll be seeing so far we have been rewarding just the share quality that is delivered to the winery. But of course we can decide to go more in that direction if we want to.
And then you also mentioned, and I know that, so you only work with Nebbiolo, and that has been historically always the case.
Yeah.
Do you maybe consider in the future to maybe, I don't know, work with Dolcetto or Barbera, or that's not?
Very unlikely in the coming future. I would say definitely not, but then the long future, who knows what is going to happen. But when we started the winery in 1958, there were, of course, much less vineyards that you see now, and many more hectares of Dolcetto. In fact, until the middle of the 70s, there were more hectares of Dolcetto vineyard planted in Barbaresco than Nebbiolo. Right now, in the village of Barbaresco, 80% of the vineyards is Nebbiolo, but it was very different in those days because Dolcetto was an easier grape to sell, an easier wine to sell. So when the winery was founded, some of the local farmers in the village, they would have liked to join the experiment, but they also wanted to deliver the other grapes they were growing because they had a lot of them, Dolcetto, Barbera, maybe Moscato, like other cooperatives or other wineries too. But the decision to stick with Nebbiolo was taken, and some of the farmers of the village didn't join, only 19 joined, because only 19 agreed to deliver only the Nebbiolo. Maybe it was a way for them to keep contact with their existing customers. So I keep selling Dolcetto and Barbera to other negociant, and here I deliver only the Nebbiolo. But the second rule that we implemented since day one was the 100% delivery.
Oh.
All the Nebbiolo.
Okay.
So no, it was difficult to see because if you deliver all the Nebbiolo here, then you can still sell Dolcetto and Barbera to other wineries, but if they ask for Nebbiolo, you can't. You don't have it. So it wasn't an easy decision, but it was taken because the idea was to bring Barbaresco back where it belongs, we think, side by side with Barolo.
Sure.
Now, the history of Barbaresco, if we want to talk about that now, it's interesting because Barolo became what it is in the middle of the 19th century, 1850, 1860. The king of Piedmont, the Marquis of Barolo, they had properties in Barolo. They started to make the wine with the Nebbiolo grapes, linking the name of the wine with the name of the village of Barolo or the area of Barolo. Barbaresco in those days was not on the map yet. We were growing the same grape, Nebbiolo, as well as other grapes here, but we didn't make a wine called Barbaresco. Yeah, maybe there were some handwritten label. I think Poderi Colla Winery, they have a handwritten label, a bottle from 1780 something with the name Barbaresco, but commercially the village was not significant, just like Barolo. Until 1894. In 1894, we consider that date like the burning date of Barbaresco as a real wine, because the owner of the castle down the street, Domizio Cavazza, which we consider the father of Barbaresco, he had this idea to make a wine here similar to Barolo. Basically said, okay, in Barolo, they're using these Nebbiolo grapes. They call the wine with the name of the village. They're starting to be famous. We can do the same thing here. So Domizio Cavazza, the owner of the castle of Barbaresco, he was also the director of the wine school of Alba. So he was a man of science, an enologist. He knew how to make wine. What he did, he had this idea of putting Barbaresco on the map, but interesting enough, he didn't start to make his own wine in the castle, maybe because he didn't have enough land. We like to think because he was a very generous man. He convinced 9 landowners of the village, including my great-grandfather and other farmers, to deliver their grapes to the castle, and they started to make wine together, a sort of a cooperative. It was called Social Winery, Cantina Sociale, Social Winery of the Castle of Barbaresco. So in 1894, they started to make wine, 100% Nebbiolo, in the Castle of Barbaresco, as a community, as a cooperative, if you want to say so, and started to sell the wine with the name of the village. And at that point, Barbaresco started to raise his head and try to be known as, he was saying, the cousin of Barolo. Mr. Cavazza wrote a poem claiming all the beauties of Barbaresco. And one of the lines says that Barbaresco is easier to digest and easier to match with food than his more austere cousin, meaning Barolo, of course. Now, easier to match with food is something we still say now. No, Barolo is a little more impulsive, at least it was used to be. Barbaresco more flexible on the table. You can have with red meat, but also pasta or risotto. Easier to digest if you try a Barbaresco hangover is kind of easier for you than a Barolo hangover. You can try, and you tell me. I proved that. I have experience in that aspect. So he tried to promote Barbaresco, put Barbaresco on the map. He also painted this poster. Okay. As we have now on our single vineyard label. We have the original from 1910. He created this poster with the bottle of Barbaresco, the knight holding the bottle. He drew a map of the village with red dots where the best vineyards were. He did things that people were doing in those days, and he put Barbaresco on the map. But then he died in 1913. And then we had First World War, and then Depression, and then Second World War. Barolo was a little better off. So Barbaresco went in a sort of dormancy, with the exception of the Gaia family getting some reputation for their Barbaresco and Barolo and other wines. Not much happened in the village until the 50s. So when the Produttori was refounded or founded in 1958, they still had that memory from the end of the previous century when Cavazza was making wine in the castle with 9 other landowners. And so they said, we got to do the same here. And that's why they had this idea of making Barbaresco only, to bring Barbaresco back where it belongs, from cousin to little brother, and now we think twin brother of Barolo.
Yeah, I definitely think so. Yeah. I don't think of Barbaresco being like the smaller, younger brother of Barolo.
It's a smaller area. Barolo is 3 times bigger in size, and of course, because of that, there are more famous wineries. Like Barbaresco is a little more limited in. For many years, was like Gaia making this very expensive wine, Produttori making this very good value Barbaresco, maybe Bruno Giacosa, but then the rest was not. Things really started to change at the end of the 80s, so relatively recently. And now the 2 areas, I think, they have a very similar reputation, and we think, with similar wines, yet different, but with the same quality.
Yes. I think I remember last time when I asked you this, and you said it's not true, but I still wanted to ask you again on camera, because I have heard some stories that in the history, Nebbiolo as a grape was not necessarily the most, I don't want to say like a money maker, but apparently it was difficult to sell, and it was much easier to maybe return the investment with the Dolcetto or Barbera. And my question is, when do you think that started to change? Because now we don't think of Dolcetto as a moneymaker. We think Nebbiolo.
Dolcetto is actually in a crisis now.
Yeah. Okay.
So things really started to change, I would say, at the end of the 70s, and then a big movement at the end of the 80s. So in that decade, from 1978, which was a fantastic vintage for Nebbiolo, Barolo, Barbaresco in general, to 1990, which is the vintage that really opened the North American market. And that made a big change. So by the middle of the 90s, nobody wanted Dolcetto anymore, and everybody was looking for Nebbiolo. But still, the thing is that the Nebbiolo grapes makes wine that needs some aging. Now we have a minimum of 2 years in the winery before release for Barbaresco, minimum of 3 years for Barolo, but it's normally clear that you should drink a Barbaresco when it's or a Barolo when he's 6 years old, 8 years old. If he's 12 years old, even better. So these are wines that people tend to keep. Like the Dolcetto, the Barbera are more easy to drink right away. And in the 60s, in the 70s, there was a big market for wine to drink without really thinking much about quality. You can have good quality Dolcetto, less good quality Dolcetto, but the market was there. The Barbaresco and the Barolo were a little more considered like for specialty wines. And that's what they were in those days. And so it was less easy to sell them because most of the wines were mainly sold to the local market.
Yeah.
Domestic, but even more like Northwest Italy. When the market started to develop, we started to sell wine also to Milan, to Rome, and then we started to export in the end of the 70s, first to the Germany, Switzerland, then UK, and then of course US. So the request for fine wines started to develop more and more dramatically, and that's where Barolo and Barbaresco were, because the aging potential, the complexity for these wines put them in the same league with Bordeaux and Burgundy, and so the market started to develop quite a bit. But I still remember, I started here in 1991 and traveling outside of Italy to try to sell the wines. It was relatively easy to make people understand Barbaresco, but nobody really wanted to talk about Langhe Nebbiolo. Langhe Nebbiolo, yeah, second wine, okay. Now the demand for Langhe Nebbiolo in the last 15 years really improved, and I think this is the fastest growing appellation in Piedmont.
Okay.
Now people know that you can have good quality for maybe half the price. So the Nebbiolo name now is very known, very famous. But even when things started to change at the end of the 70s, in the 80s, it was more about Barolo and Barbaresco. And it's only in the new millennium that it's also more about Nebbiolo in general. And now, again, these people are, every time there's an old vineyard of Dolcetto, an old vineyard of Barbera comes to end, the people replant most likely with Nebbiolo. Because the demand is there,
Yeah. And I think there's something magical in Nebbiolo coming from Barolo and Barbaresco, this Langhe area. And I think I've never have tasted wine that has been from Nebbiolo outside of Langhe that has come to even close to have that. So I was thinking maybe you could tell us a bit what makes it so well suited to this area.
Yeah.
Is it the history and that you know how to make it, or
it's the terroir we like to take. Yeah. It's the soil, the special combination of soil and climate or microclimate that makes this area particularly fit for Nebbiolo. So Nebbiolo is often said it's similar to Pinot Noir. So it's a difficult grape to grow, complex but delicate at the same time. But even compared to Pinot Noir, it is less intense fruit, more spicy notes, a little more shy. So you can blend Nebbiolo. I tasted Nebbiolo from California, from Oregon, from Australia, Sardinia even. It's can be a good wine, but it just doesn't deliver the same flavors. When you talk about Cabernet Sauvignon, Chardonnay, those are even Barbera for us. Those are varietal which a much more powerful personality, where the grape varietal always stands out, and you can deliver the taste almost everywhere in the world. But in the Nebbiolo, the terroir is almost more important than the Nebbiolo itself. So it's the combination of these grapes in this area that makes these unique wines. And the same varietal planted in a different soil simply is not delivering. So it's quite unique. In a way, it's lucky for us because it's very difficult to reproduce. Of course, in a way, the advantage of Burgundy and Bordeaux is that they grow grapes that people can plant everywhere in the world with good results, and then when they want the original, they go to Burgundy or Bordeaux. With the Barolo and Barbaresco, you can try to plant Nebbiolo, but the results are not that interesting. So the name of that grape outside of the region is not really much known. So when we go to less mature markets, they still don't know much about Barolo and Barbaresco because they don't know wine made with the same grape from other areas because they're not that interesting. It's this unique balance between calcium, clay, and sand with this misty climate that makes Barolo and Barbaresco what they are.
Yeah, and I think the name as well, Nebbiolo. It's just we drive here, and there's in case of Nebbia.
Exactly.
Yeah. So
there are two legends behind the name Nebbiolo. One, which is the most known, is that the name Nebbiolo comes from the word nebbia, which means fog or mist, because it's a late ripening grape. And when we pick the grape, often we have definitely mist, but also sometimes heavy fog lingering on the hills early in the morning, hopefully burning out during the day. So the nebbia, there is a grape that is picked when the nebbia is around, Nebbiolo. The other reason for this name nebbia is because every varietal has a substance that is called pruin, which is on the outside of the skins. And when you touch the skin of the grape, it's kind of a white
powder
that goes away. This pruin is particularly intense in Nebbiolo, so it gives to the cluster kind of a foggy appearance. So those are the two. They're probably both true. It's true that with the new climate we are having now, global warming or whatever you want to call it, the nebbia is not that common anymore in September or during the harvest. Usually comes much later. So it's not true anymore in the last 20 years that we pick the Nebbiolo when the fog is around, because the fog comes later. But the pruin is still there. So both theory, both legends are accurate.
Okay, great. I also wanted to talk to you specifically about the single vineyards or MGAs.
Yes.
And often when you read in the books, they say, the history was to not blend everything together, and now they're making this really modern style. And then I read that Brunotto, Gaia, Bruno Giocosa bottled apparently single vineyard wines in 1960s.
Yeah.
So first of all, I wonder if any of those names have become as MGAs now or not, and do you also believe that like the history is what it was, like blending?
Yeah, no, it's not really history. It's more the nature of the industry, the wine industry, if you want to call it so. As we talked before, the area was a land of small farmers with small properties selling grapes. So the people making wines were negociant. Gaia, Brunotto, Rinaldi, all the famous great names that you know now until the 60s were basically buying grapes. Now, when you buy grapes, you want to buy good grapes. Therefore, you're trying to buy grapes from great vineyards. But you don't want that vineyard to become famous. Otherwise, next year, the farmer will ask you for more money, or there will be more people coming. So when the wine was made mainly by wineries buying grapes, the focus was on the name of the brand and not on the vineyard. But then in the late 50s, 60s, these wineries started to understand, and Gaia was the first one really, that if I own my own vineyard, I can build my reputation and control the quality much better. So these wineries that were used to buy grapes, they started to try to buy land. And also later on, like in the 70s, in the 80s, more and more small farmers started to make wine with small wineries because the market was there. So there's been this transition from winery buying grapes to winery owning land. Now, when you own the land, you kind of like the idea that your land becomes famous because it gets more valuable. So this is to say that we always knew that some vineyards were better than others. I have this map from 1894 made by Mr. Cavazza, a map of the village of Barbaresco with red dots where the best vineyards were. And you can see these names, Rio Sordo, Pora, maybe different spelling, double R in the map, and now it's only one R. Monte Stefano, and the same thing in Barolo. So the concept that some vineyards were better than others has always been here. But the idea to putting that names on the label is relatively recent. It started in the 60s. So it's not like it's modern. It's just that we always try to get the grapes from the best vineyards, but instead of blending them together, showing the difference became an interesting idea. We started to make single vineyards in 1967. So we've been making them for a long time as well.
So you are in this list as well?
Yeah, probably, yes. 67 was the first year. Of course, for us, it was very easy because having all these farmers owning all this great land. In fact, one of the reasons of the success of Produttori del Barbaresco is that the farmers that joined the Produttori at the beginning, 19, and then soon they became 25, 35, they joined and they owned great pieces of land. The fact that the big wineries didn't invest much in Barbaresco in those days, with the exception of Gaia, meant that the small farmers, they still own great land. And so we, even now, can claim control of a vast part of some of the best vineyards of the Grand Crus of the region. Yes, it's true that we look to Burgundy. Now, as the market started to develop and people started to make connection between Nebbiolo and Pinot Noir, they say, well, in Burgundy, they make a big deal of the vineyards, Montrachet, Bâtard, Montrachet, Chachard, and we also have great vineyards, but we don't put them on the label. We should do the same. And so people started to do that. So it was not like something modern. It was more like discovery the real potential of the region that had always been there.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And which I think is interesting, we just discussed that sometimes people call Barbaresco the younger brother of Barolo, and yet the MGAs were finished first in 2007, if I'm not mistaken, in Barbaresco, and Barolo only followed. So was it for because you started earlier, or it was easier for you, or was there some bureaucratic reasons?
Bureaucratic reason, but let me put it away. So these names were always known, some of them more than others, of course. They started to be used on wine labels in the 60s, and then widely used on the wine labels in the 80s and the 90s. And some wineries used geographical historical names like we do. Some of the wineries created brand names, like family names, and put the vineyard name as on the label. So by the middle of the 90s, the situation was very confused in the region. So the Vintners Association decided to make sense out of it. And so we started this process of mapping the MGAs, mapping the crus of the region. It took 5 years, basically, from 1996 to 2001. Basically, what I don't know if this can be a little boring, but you stop me.
No, it's not. No.
So basically, the Vintners Association, the consortium of the producers, told to each municipality in Barbaresco and in Barolo, told to the mayor of the town, your producers are using these names, Rabayà, Asili, Pora, Brunate, Cannubi. You should map these vineyards. You should map this area. Give us a map to define where they are. Because now everybody knew where Cannubi is or where Asili is, but it's one thing to say that is Asili, it's one thing to say it starts there, it stops there where the oak tree is, then it goes down, then it turns. That was never done. It was more like a use that was kind of a little more, common sense.
Yes.
So this 5 years work, several meetings, the mayor of Barbaresco called all the people owning land around Pora, and he told them, okay, now we have to define the borders. Some discussions, some a little bit of fighting, a lot of wine drunk, some salami and pan, things like that, some cheese. After 5 years, so this, the village of Barbaresco defined the single vineyard, the MGAs, the village of Barolo, the village of Serralunga, and they were all submitted to the consortio. They look at them, make sure that it was any stupid thing or misspelling, things like that, and send it to the Torino government. That took another couple of years, and finally they approved it. They sent it to Rome for the final approval. Because it's DOCG. So and in Rome say, why they want to do this thing? Why you want to have 66 MGA mapped in Barbaresco and 128 in Barolo? Actually, at that point, we wanted to call them cru. They say cru. What is cru? Cru is a French word. You can't use that name. And what about we call them vigneto, which means vineyards. No, that's a more generic. So that's why they're called MGAs, which is a very stupid technical term, but we were not allowed to call them cru. But finally, we were able to convince the national authority, DOCG authority, that the region needed to do this because this was a tradition that we had. We had a tradition to have Asili, Pora, Montestefano since a century. We simply and we've been using them on the label for 3 decades. Now we want to make them official. And so finally, they accepted that, so they became official in Barbaresco from the 2006 vintage. In Barolo, the work was done at the same time. But in Barolo, they couldn't agree on Canubi. It took another 4 years and some lawyers and final.
But Canubi is huge.
Canubi is huge, but some people wanted to be small because now they had Canubi Boschis, Canubi Muscatel, Canubi San Lorenzo. Somebody wanted to just have Canubi, and somebody wanted, no, you have to be specific. They couldn't agree on that, so it took another 3 years. So the reason why Barolo was only finally approved in 2010 instead of 2006 Barbaresco, because they fought a little bit more, and they had to go to court basically to define. But now, since 2010 for Barolo, since 2006 for Barbaresco, the MGAs are defined, officially mapped. So if I want to write Pora on my wine label, I need to prove that I have land in Pora. And if I have 1 hectare, I can make 4,000 bottles. And they give me 4,000 of these. And if I have 2 hectares, then I can make 8,000 bottles. But if I take away 1 hectare, for 3 years, they take away 4,000 bottles. So it's each MGA is controlled by the government as it was his own DOCG. So it's very much controlled. And the same in Barolo. So again, it's a way to avoid that people that have land near Pora, but not really in Pora, they use their names. So the names now are very strictly controlled. We didn't do a definition of a classification of quality like they have in Bordeaux, like first growth, second growth. So we have 66 officially mapped MGAs in Barbaresco. For the law, they're all equal. Of course, Asili is more famous than Pora, which is more famous than Cars, but consumer may know that. But for the law, they're all the same. So the big job was to map the vineyards. The next step will be to define a quality classification of them, but that would be a totally different.
That's something that you are aiming for? Yes,
but it's very difficult to do. Because in a democracy, and we live in a democracy, thank God, it's very difficult to tell somebody in Pora that your vineyard is not as good as Asili. Because the guy in Pora says, who says that? And maybe the guy in Pora sells the wine for double the price of another guy in Asili. So it's not a price, it's the terroir. But define terroir. Well, we put together a panel, we taste the wine. Well, let's taste them blind and see if my Pora is not. So in fact, in Bordeaux, in Burgundy, they were able to do it because they did it 200 years ago when the marquis or the bishop or whoever, the king decided, and then was it. And
Yes.
to define, 20 years ago, the University of Torino took this 5 years task of defining the terroir of Barolo. So I think they put together like a number of research in, I think 10 or 20 different vineyards of Barolo, like Brunate, Lazzarito, Canubi. They did the terroir analysis, micro-vinification, bud breaks. They did this project that the students, the university researchers do. And now they collected all these data, and they defined this. And at the end of the program, the final result was the difference between the vineyards are not statistically significant. So scientifically, from a scientifically objective point of view, you cannot define a difference between Canubi, Lazzarito. Of course, when you taste the wine, it's the terroir, but terroir is kind of a magical term. It's not science. And in order to tell this guy that your wine is not as good as that one, you need to have a scientific proof, and it's not there. So it will be difficult to do. There are ways, like we said, okay, we have 66 vineyards mapped in Barbaresco. Of course, everybody who has a piece of land in Asili is going to use that name because that brings more money. But if there's another vineyard, it's called, I'm sorry to say, Cars, nobody knows, and maybe nobody using it on the label because it doesn't bring any extra value on the market. So let's say that after 10 years, out of the 66 names, the ones that are not used, they become second growth.
Okay.
And that can be a way to do it in a objective way, but it's not been done yet. So right now, 66 vineyards in Barbaresco, MGAs officially mapped, and 128 in Barolo officially mapped. The good thing is that when you buy a wine with the MGA, you know that it comes from the MGA. Then it can be better or less good. That's up to your taste.
Yeah.
And up to the producer.
But what factors were taken into consideration when these? So we talked about the history that everyone knew, but was it also like the soil, elevation, like up to certain point, aspect, shading?
Yeah. So the tradition, this is Monte Stefano. It starts here and it ends here, this piece of land here. So all the people that own land there were called together and they decided, okay, when the hills turns and from south become east, then it's not Monte Stefano anymore. And everybody agreed on that. And so the main factor was the exposure and the terroir. But then also property came together. For example, Martinenga in Barbaresco is a single vineyard, MGA defined, but it's also a monopoly. It's owned by one single family, the Marchese di Gresi family. So that became an MGA on its own because traditionally it's one single property. So also that was taken in consideration. There is another single vineyard, it's called Ovello. It's a relatively large area with multiple exposures, west, southwest, east, southeast, but they share the same microclimate, which tends to be cooler than others, and they share the same terroir, which is higher in clay. So within the Ovello, we have subzones that locally are known with names like Loreto, Bernino, Albano, but it was commonly decided not to go too specific. Let's just call everything Ovello. Yes, Ovello doesn't have the same exposure, but has the same soil and the same microclimate. So it was a number. That's why it took a number of meetings, some discussions, and people in the Ovello agreed to do that. In other regions, they were in other areas more specific, so they didn't want to do so. Like Rabaya is one single exposure, very well defined, and the other side of the hill is not called like that, even if it's a very similar soil. So it was like democratically decided by the owners of the land, put together by the city hall and approved by the consortium, the regional government and the national government. So pretty specific.
Okay. And does Barbaresco have MGA for each commune as well?
Yes.
Okay.
Well, no, sorry. No, we don't.
It was in Barolo?
Yeah.
Not in...
Yes. There was a tradition in Barolo to make Barolo from Serralunga, but we never had that tradition here. The area is smaller, and the area never had that tradition in the past. So at the time the 66 MGAs were approved, the communal MGA was not considered. It was actually recently, just a few months ago, that proposal came out, was put to vote among all the producer of Barbaresco, but it was still rejected. It didn't reach the majority of the votes.
Okay.
So we still don't have that possibility. I don't personally. I voted in favor because to give the other producer a chance to do it. But personally, we are not interested in doing that. We think that the region of Barbaresco is more similar in soil. The three villages are not that different. They don't have really their own reputation to stand out like in Barolo. So it's good to have a Barbaresco and then the MGAs without the communal one, which it can create a little bit of confusion on the market. But in Barolo, they have that tradition for many years. Yeah.
And I also wanted to ask you, do you see now consumers getting more familiar with the MGAs and kind of knowing exactly what they're looking for, that they want to have, I don't know, the Ovello or the Rabaya or...
Yes and no. I mean, the general consumer, is just happy to buy a good Barbaresco. More and more people know about the single vineyards, but when they start to know the single vineyards, the MGAs, they like to try more than one. In fact, we make 9 MGAs since 1960. Well, actually, we started to make 9 in 1978. 67 we started with 5 and then we added the others. So we make the same 9 since 1978, when they were simply vineyard names, and now they are MGAs. But the market is very receptive, so people are happy to buy whatever is available because they tend to sell out. So of course, if they have some of them are more famous, Asili, Rabaya, Monte Stefano, so people tend to be more keen towards those. But if those are not available, they buy the other one and they like to compare. Often we do like horizontal tasting with 3, 4, sometimes 9 single vineyards, and for the people it's very fascinating because they're made in the same style by the same winery with exactly the same vinification, everything else. So when you compare them, you really can see or appreciate the nuances of the different terroirs.
I think it's really important for Produttori del Barbaresco to kind of say that, because if I'm not mistaken, every single vineyard, like MGA, is made the same way. Yes?
Yeah.
So what the difference that you feel, it's pure terroir.
Pure terroir, exactly. And so we sell them for the same price, even if some of them are smaller in production and maybe more famous. But for us, this front line same price is a statement that they're all good. If there is a vintage where some of them are not good, we simply don't make them. Okay. We just make the Barbaresco, and we use this fruit to make a better quality here. But when we put them on the market, it's because there is quality in each of them. Now, Pora can be a little more open and easy to go, Monte Stefano a little more tannic, Paillet a little more floral. So there are differences, but again, as you said, to show those differences they come strictly from the terroir is the beauty of this lineup of wines.
Do you have your own favorite? Or like everyone usually answers, like, it's like with children.
Yeah, I usually do that, then I get tired. So now I say, if I have to pick one, probably is Montefico.
Okay, Montefico.
Yeah, which is good tannic character, but always very elegant and with a little bit of minerality. Like Monte Stefano, which is the twin brother of Montefico, is a little more robust and full body. Montefico has this kind of a little sharper finish that fits my taste more. So if I had to pick one, probably is the Montefico.
Does it change, like the preferences? Because sometimes for me it changes. Like
Yeah, every vintage it can be a particular winner of them. But they tend to be all good. But year after year, Montefico is the one I lean more towards. But I remember the 2019 Ovello is particularly bright and kind of a winner, an overachiever, you can say. So yeah, each vintage one can shine a little bit more or can be a little more interesting than you expect. But the quality is there all of them, I think, is the beauty of this lineup.
We touched a little bit about some of the changes or updates in the within the appellation and MGAs. So we talked about the commune, and it was cut down,
rejected in Barbaresco.
Yes, and then so off camera we discussed the vineyards being planted on the northern slopes. So that has been also rejected.
Yes, it's actually, it's a little more complicated because you can plant everywhere you want. But the Barbaresco DOCG or the Barolo DOCG is not given to Nebbiolo vineyards facing north. So you can plant a Nebbiolo facing north, but it's immediately Langhe Nebbiolo. It cannot be Barbaresco or it cannot be Barolo. And that because it was done in 1963 when the wines became DOC. It was confirmed in 1981 when the two wines became DOCG. Reason being that north exposure is too cold to make high quality Nebbiolo. And so, you can make maybe everyday Nebbiolo, but not Barolo and Barbaresco. Now, the new climate for the last 2 decades is really changing things. Sometimes south is too hot now. And north can actually be just basically. So the idea of allowing northern exposed Nebbiolo vineyard to become Barolo and Barbaresco was put to vote. It needed a 61% majority. So it's not easy to pass. And didn't pass. It wasn't a technical reason. Probably often in the recent vintages you can make good quality Nebbiolo even in a vineyard facing north. But of course, if you allow that, there are already existing Nebbiolo vineyard planted facing north that most of the producers use to make Langhe Nebbiolo. If you allow those to become Barolo Barbaresco, you immediately have like a 10 or 20% increase in production that has been judged too risky for the balance of the market. So I think the reason that most people said no, some people said no because they think it's too cold.
Yes.
But said no just to kind of to avoid an increase in production. But again, you are allowed to plant whatever you want. Simply, if you want to call the wine Barolo or Barbaresco, it has to be east, south, or west exposed, and not north. Okay. And it's still like that now. All these decisions about the appellation are taken by the producers. It's like, again, a democracy. So they meet and they vote, and they can reject or approve whatever is brought to consideration. And of course, it is not easy to change the rules. Even if it's, for example, 2024 was a difficult vintage with a lot of rain, a lot of fog in the harvest time, cold spring. So this year, north-faced Nebbiolo, definitely not good. But last year was very hot and very dry, so probably north-faced Nebbiolo was good. So overall, to stay on the safe side, the majority of the producers said, no, let's keep it the way it is.
It's also nice to hear that there's still the idea with the quality, behind, and kind of to not overproduce and kind of keep that premium associated.
In fact, for Barolo and Barbaresco, the new planting is controlled by the consortium. So you can only expand the Barbaresco region for 7 new hectares per year and 20 new hectares per year in Barolo, but no more. So even if you plant Nebbiolo, in order to be Barbaresco, you need to receive the authorization, and there is a waiting list.
Okay.
So it's in order to keep the production based. Now, what is important to say that is our Langhe Nebbiolo, in fact, is 100% Barbaresco.
Okay.
So theoretically, Langhe Nebbiolo you can make with north exposed vineyards or Nebbiolo vineyards outside Barbaresco or outside Barolo, but we don't. So this wine is 100% Barbaresco fruit that we decide to sell young. And therefore we call it Langhe Nebbiolo. If I wait 1 more year, or 2 more years in this case, I can put this label on this wine, and it's perfectly legal. So for us, Langhe Nebbiolo is still a baby Barbaresco.
So in characteristic way, it would be very similar.
Yes, it delivers the Barbaresco terroir because it's vineyards in Barbaresco, they are not aged long enough, and it comes from young vineyards. So it's a little brighter, a little more spicy, a little less complex and deep, but it's Barbaresco fruit. If you taste our Langhe Nebbiolo, you can have an idea of how the Barbaresco from that vintage will be pretty accurate. Like, from other wineries, you can have a Langhe Nebbiolo produced with grapes that come from many different appellations within the Langhe. So it can be Barolo, Barbaresco, Roero, and other Dogliani, larger production. So for us, we only deal with Barbaresco fruit. So our Langhe Nebbiolo is a Barbaresco sold young, basically.
Yes, okay. I have last question left to ask you, and that I ask it every single guest I have, and that is, which is one wine myth you would like to debunk?
This super cab they make in Napa Valley with a lot of oak and a lot of extraction, silver oak. Yeah, those wines, are really very expensive, and I just don't get what's the big fuss about that. No, maybe because being a Barbaresco producer and being raised and born with Barbaresco, I like more the subdued quality.
Delicacy.
Yeah. So in a way, I enjoy more a Pinot Noir from Oregon than a big, overly fat and overly extracted cab from Napa. But that's again.
Yeah, those are rich. Like they just rich. Stain your teeth and just really.
And for me, for us, wine is never takes center stage. It's always a companion of food, and those wines are very difficult to drink with food. So maybe it's because the way we approach wine. Like for us, the wine has to enhance the quality of the food. And it can be a great wine, like a Barolo from Giacomo Conterno or a Gaia, but it's always a food companion. Like those wines are not really food companions, so they are a myth on their own.
Yes.
And I can see that people approach wine in that way, but for us, we don't approach wine in that way. We don't drink wine. We say that we always drink wine with our legs under the table, meaning while we eat. And so I tend to enjoy the more subtle nuances in the wine and not the big, heavy, strong character.
Thank you. Yeah, perfect. So, I think we have similar ideas there.
Good.
And I have a small gift for you.
Oh, fantastic.
So this is a No Sediment hat from our YouTube channel.
Squeeze grapes.
Squeezing grapes.
Fantastic.
Yeah. And maybe the next time you are in the vineyards, you can use it.
You can wear this in the summer. Yeah. Fantastic.
I hope it fits.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you. That's a wrap.
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.